Hello, welcome to Internationally Speaking, a video series from Brookings India where we talk about what's happening in the world and the implications for India. It's January 24th, 2019, and there's a lot going around, happening around the world. India itself is gearing up for general elections in a few months. The US federal government shutdown continues. We're on day 33. China has announced that a further slowdown to its economic growth, its official economic growth figures. But today we can we'll be talking about two important developments. One is Brexit. You've seen a lot about it in the news. A deal brokered between Prime Minister Theresa May of Britain and the European Union was rejected overwhelmingly by the British Parliament on January 15th. Nonetheless, the EU is set to leave, the UK is set to leave the European Union on the 29th of March. So this leaves very few options. What looks probable is what's called a no-deal option, which is the UK will leave on the 29th of March with no agreed deal with the European Union. A second option, and something that the Prime Minister seems to be hoping for, is an amended deal of some kind involving members of her own political coalition as well as possibly other parties to agree on a deal that can pass the Parliament. And then there's a remote possibility of another referendum, and somehow Britain, something that some people are hoping for, somehow Britain does not leave the European Union. All of this is complicated by a number of issues, but one of them, perhaps chief amongst them, is what's known as the Irish backstop. This basically has come about because the Republic of Ireland did not opt to leave the European Union and is set to stay in. But a hard border between Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom, and the Republic of Ireland goes against peace agreements, the Good Friday Agreement that was brokered a couple of decades ago, and therefore would jeopardize the terms of that peace agreement. At the same time, if the default option occurs, the Irish backstop, it would require the Northern Ireland remaining part of various EU rules and regulations and customs unions, and this the UK deems to be undermining its own sovereignty, and this has been one of the trickiest issues that has had to be resolved as the UK looks set to leave the European Union. Now, why does this matter for India? Several reasons. One, the UK is perhaps India's biggest link to the European Union. It has the largest number of overseas Indians of any European country. It's been a cultural bridge in some ways between India and Europe. Once the UK starts to leave, I think it will have significant implications, obviously, on India's engagement. Many Indian companies use the UK as a base for their operations across the European Union, so of course that will have an implication for Indian firms as well. On the other hand, opportunities may very well open up for trade and other types of agreements between India on the one hand and both London and Brussels on the other. So there may also be a silver lining from India's point of view to Brexit. Let's move on to another issue which is pressing and which is in the news, and that's the situation in Afghanistan. So what exactly is going on there? One of the challenges for analyzing what's going on in Afghanistan is that there's several variables at play, several different factors currently changing facts on the ground and at a very quick pace. One, the security situation is deteriorating. We've seen recent attacks in Kabul against foreigners, including Indian citizens who've been killed. There's just been a major attack against Afghan national security forces in which over 100 have been killed. Secondly, politics is extremely uncertain. Parliamentary elections were delayed repeatedly. They finally took place, but there were many question marks about the execution of those elections. Presidential elections are about to come up. It's becoming a very crowded field. There are many challenges to President Ashraf Ghani. And so I think there's some question marks about how this political transition will take place, if at all. Thirdly, the Taliban, the opposition forces, while they have made some headway, are also deeply divided. And so several Taliban groups are not represented in their political councils. And the rise of ISIS has proven another factor, particularly in northeast Afghanistan, has proved another factor that has complicated the situation. But furthermore, if this is not difficult or complicated enough, the role of external actors is changing very rapidly. The United States has begun talks with the Taliban, but these are still at a very preliminary stage, taking place largely in the United Arab Emirates, and are really still at a stage of talks about talks. Meanwhile, Pakistan, which in other circumstances might see this as an advantage, might see the current situation in a positive light, is for a variety of reasons unable to fully take advantage of this situation. And questions remain about whether a firm resolution in Afghanistan is really something that Pakistan's security forces even desire in the first place. Furthermore, China's role has come into stronger relief. A few years ago, China took part in quadrilateral talks with Afghanistan, the US, and Pakistan. It took part in those talks at Pakistan's insistence, but was unclear about its exact role and what its objectives were. Today, its counterterrorism concerns have increased, and there is actually a proposal for China establishing some kind of base or military facility in what's known as the Wakhan corridor, a very thin strip of land, part of Afghanistan, in order to stem Islamist infiltration into China. Furthermore, Russia has changed its position. It's now become much more open and supportive of incorporating the Taliban, as has in some ways Iran as well. And so external actors, whether it's the US, China, Pakistan, Iran, Russia, are all subtly changing their positions as well as to how they would like to see the end stage evolve. On top of all of this, I think there are big question marks about the US military role as well. While President Trump has been very clear about calling for a withdrawal, there are many reasons for why that may not happen, or at least may not happen to the extent that many people currently believe. Finally, what does this mean for India? Well, India has done two things in Afghanistan. One, it has been one of the largest aid providers and is increasingly one of the largest trade partners for Afghanistan. Indeed, it's now, by some measures, the second largest export destination for Afghanistan, and probably the largest destination for high-value exports. In a number of other ways, India has been very deeply involved in state-building efforts in Afghanistan, whether it is building major dam projects, building the parliament building, building highways, or a whole number of other infrastructure projects. But secondly, India has also taken perhaps the most extreme position of external actors to engagement with the Taliban. Some have called this very unrealistic, but it has given India a certain degree of legitimacy with all the important political players in Kabul. The question now is, as the security situation deteriorates and as other actors change their positions, will India have to be a bit more flexible in this? And I think that this will be something that will be on the minds of Indian policymakers for the forthcoming year. Thank you for joining us on Internationally Speaking. Hope you can join us another time as well.